All right, let's get to some intellectual conversation tonight, everyone, shall we? And it's about our nation. Now, if you think that politics is all what will shape this country, you might get it wrong. There are some fundamental issues at the very base of our national structure. Tonight, we'll get to it. A lot of arguments have come up on the manner in which wealth is distributed in Nigeria amongst the tiers of government, the federal, the state, and the local government. The Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Commission has reviewed Nigeria's vertical revenue allocation formula. The 4-volume report of the review was presented to President Muhammadu Buhari at the State House in Abuja during a visit by the delegation from the Commission. According to President Muhammadu Buhari, the last time a review on Nigeria's sharing formula was done was in 1992, and since then, the changing dynamics of Nigeria's political economy, such as privatization, deregulation, funding arrangements for primary health care, education, and clamors for decentralization, have made this review necessary, especially its vertical aspect, which involve the tiers of government. The new formula reflects a 3.3% reduction in federal government allocation. For those who have argued that federal government is carrying just too much, it's getting too much. An increase of 3.07% in state allocation and a 0.4% increase in local government allocation. For those who love the local government tier, they probably are thinking that that's not enough. Well, the federal government allocation now stands at 35.17%, state allocation 29.79%, local government 21.04%, ecology 1%, stabilization account 0.5%, development of natural resources 1.2%, while the federal capital territory allocation 1.2%. You can see what currently operates and what is being proposed. Go back to the initial slide. My producer, if you can go back to the initial slide, so people can get a sense of what is being, or what currently operates, and what is being proposed by RMAFC. Now, 5.268 for the federal, and now it's being proposed to 5.17. But if you look at local government, it's it's not up to a digit of the change in percentage. Let's get talking about this. Tonight, we bring in the legal and economic point of view to all of this. What does this new regime, if standardized, mean for Nigeria? Tonight, we're getting a benefit of some legal and economic insight. I'm being joined by an economist and the managing director of the financial derivative, our friend, Mr. Bismarck Rwani. That's one I run to when I have some problem with figures. Thank you so much, Mr. Bismarck, for joining us tonight. And also, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Morrison Quakers. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on the program. Let's begin by trying to break it down for our viewers to understand. This is a political program, and my viewers are such that they want to get a practical point of view of this. Mr. Rwani, give us, in terms of figures, the way you break it down for us on this program, those difficult numbers. What does this mean? Should the constitutional review process ratify what has been proposed by RMAFC? What does it? Is there any significant change in the new proposition?
Yes, it is. It's a significant change. In the first place, Nigeria suffers from an ailment of fiscal dominance. In other words, there's a lot of fiscal dominance of federal government over state governments and state government domination of local government activities. So one thing is the revenue. The other way is effectiveness of expenditure. So what it does mean is that the federal government now will go down to about 49%, the states will go up by 3%, and local governments will go up by about 0.5%. But effectively, the state governments actually dominate and take over the local government spending. So you can aggregate both of them together. Eventually, we'll get to a point where the local governments will be free to spend their own money. But what it does mean is that the federal government has less revenue to spend, and the state governments will have more revenue to spend. But if you look at the economy as a whole, only 8.5% of consumption in this country, aggregate demand, is government. 91.5% is private sector. But there's a domineering effect of federal government because the federal government controls scarce resources, and the governments control scarce resources, control almost all the foreign exchange and the policies. Therefore, they have more than a domino and a dominant effect on economic activity. That is where the matter comes. Now, what we have to understand now is that fiscal federalism means that power comes from the bottom. all the way to the top. But at the same time, economic domination means that financial power comes from the center all the way to the bottom. So this is still theoretical. And to put it in real numbers, the total amount in the federation that came out of the federation account this year was 8 trillion naira, which is only 4.32% of GDP and about 46.99% of the 17 trillion naira, that is the federal government alone. But if you look at when you add both states and federal government together, you have to double that, and then you now have what they call the exclusive list, and then the subsidiaries which the state governments have activity for. But having said that, what we raised or what we plan to raise this year was 10.7 trillion, and the deficit itself is 8.92 trillion. So, and of this deficit, 4 trillion of it is going to be subsidies. And the subsidies, 4 trillion naira is what the federal government is going to do. And that's taken out from the revenue and reduces the amount that's available to both the federal government and the state government to carry out their duties. The other limiting factor is the exchange rate. The dollars are converted at the rate of 416 naira to a dollar by the central bank and paid into the federation account. But the state governments and almost all Nigerians are buying money, dollars, effectively at an autonomous market rate. So there's that big, if you allow the exchange rate to reflect market conditions, the state governments and the federal government will get much more money than it is. Thirdly, external debt. External debt was $10 billion in 2015. Now it is about $38.39 billion. It has gone up by a factor of 3. It has gone up by 300%, by 258% ever since 2015. So that's where we are. And
sorry, Mr. Rwani, just give me a moment. Let's take a quick breather. And when we come back, we'll be able to make sense of some of these figures, especially some of those things that you have crunched for us, for our viewers to understand and be able to make sense of all of this. We take a quick break, a commercial break, and we'll be right back. Stay with us, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. Mr. Bismarck Rwani, Economics and the Executive Director of Financial Derivatives, have been talking to us, crunching those figures and making sense of what it means for the load shedding for the federal government. Also, Mr. Kwek has joined us, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Mr. Rwani, apologies to have broken into your line of thought. But if you look at it critically, you were telling us about the Nigeria's precarious fiscal position and the implication of some of these reviews. Apologies to have cut short your explanation. Please go ahead.
Let's go back to something. Where does this money come from? The money comes from 4 major sources. 1, petroleum profit tax, corporate income tax, custom and import duty, and then other levies and things like that. And it is a shame that we are talking about how to share money, while in fact we should be talking about how to create wealth. And that's what you can see there. In 2020, we had 7.73 trillion naira. In 2021, we've had 8.04. And this year so far, in first quarter, we have 1.86. In spite of the fact that the oil price has increased, if you multiply this by 4, you will find out that we are actually coming in at about 7.44. So even though the price of oil has increased, our production has come down, our petroleum profit tax is actually declining because the petroleum sector is contracting. So there's an existential crisis of wealth and output creation, while at the same time, the emphasis of everybody is about how to share this dwindling revenue. So I think we need to put that on the table, that there is a declining revenue profile. And meanwhile, population is growing much faster than we thought. So we have a problem there, and it could have a real problem if the economy is not pulled out of the current trend. Now, having said that, the point is this, that the state governments have a lot of responsibilities, because there's what you have the subsidiary list, which has both state and federal government, and then they have the primary. And the state government gets VAT. 85% of the VAT collected goes to the state governments. Right. So what I was trying to point out earlier on, that if the oil production and petroleum profit tax increases, we'll get more money. If the subsidies are eliminated, the states will have, and federal government will have more money. And thirdly, if the exchange rate mechanism is reflective of market conditions, the states and the federal government will get more money. The question is that, what do you do with this money? Are they held accountable? Are we getting value for money? Or is it being wasted? Or is it being raided? Or is it being judiciously spent? Those are the questions that need to be asked.
You were talking about government consumption, which is about 8.5%, and the private sector consumption is 91.5%. The implication of that in the face of this review, and you look at the budget and the GDP is only 10 to 20%, the state government inclusive. Give us a sense of what you mean by those figures.
About $423 billion, of which 8.5%, 53, about $35 billion is all that the government consumption is, while $384 billion is what the private sector consumes. But the private sector draws all of its energy, all of its revenue, and all of its policy support and everything from the federal government. So you cannot be successful in this country, even in the private sector, if you don't have some support from the government. So basically, you have a feeding bottle economy where everybody is a parasite, everybody goes to beg and get things from the government. And without government support, you are unlikely to be successful in any sector that you participate. That entire mindset has to change. Secondly, that this insignificant contribution of government to overall GDP performance, whilst at the same time it has so much influence, has to change so it reflects whatever the government is doing to be reflected in its contribution and output. That has to be done. Thirdly, the discourse should be about how to create wealth rather than how to share wealth, right? Because that is where as long as we continue to share and we create more states and spend more and have legislators and everybody spending beyond their means, then you will have this difficulty. So that conversation has to be corrected. And you made a point just now that Nigeria has a revenue problem. I beg to differ. Nigeria has a minor revenue problem, or more of a management problem. Because if you cannot manage the revenues, then you have the negative outcome. That is why, in spite of the fact that the price of oil has increased, in spite of the fact that revenues are increasing, the economic outcomes have been more and more negative. So we need to deal with the management problem as well as dealing with the revenue problem.
Mr. Ruwani, give us a sense of the changes or the proposed review as far as the third tier of government is concerned. That's the local government. People will tell you, it's a reality, isn't it, that the local government is the closest to the people. It's a grassroots government. And that change that we see is less than 1% change if it comes into effect. Is it dramatic? Are we serious about that tier of government and its effectiveness in the livelihood of Nigerians?
So you have to ask, even when it was 20.6%, was that money going to the local governments? Was it not being ambushed by the state governments? And what impact did it have on the people at the grassroots? So effectiveness of expenditure and nominal expenditure are two different things. So that's the whole idea. What impact, how efficient is the spending, and what impact does it have on the lives of people? Because in the end, it is the well-being of the people that matters. And I can submit here that almost all the state governments have local government chairmen and all sorts of nominees. And so that's where the cookie crumbles, as far as I'm concerned. We need to understand that the responsibility of governance is actually to deliver goods and tangibles to the people. And that is missing at this point in time. But there's too much emphasis on sharing revenue.
Mr. Ruwani, as much as you are giving us a sense of the economics of all of this, the reality is that this has to go through a constitutional amendment process. The president has said as much. But you know what it means that when it gets to the state, I'm not sure the governors are happy because what the governors propose is different from what the Revenue Allocation Commission have put forward. Do you see that this review we go through?
I suspect that there'll be some compromise. Politics is about compromise and negotiation. And you cannot actually begin to do this in the midst of a political campaign. So my suspicion is that most of these things will be deferred until the next administration comes and when people can settle down. And it has to be taken comprehensively rather than in isolation. There are some political issues, there are some social issues, there are some anthropological issues, there are also some macroeconomic issues, and there are global trends that have to be taken into consideration. And it begins to depend on how strong the leadership of the parties that run the country are and how strong the leadership of the government is. In that kind of situation, then you might be able to get some things done. But again, I come back to the fact that nominal expenditure and effective expenditure are two different things, and we have to deal with that. There's no hiding place for that. We must be able to manage the resources that we have. There's a management problem, and that's why we are getting suboptimal results.
When it comes to management, you're touching on the issue of leadership, isn't it? Let's bring Mr. Quaker, see if you can hear him now. Senior Advocate, if you can hear me now, let's give it another try and let our viewers know what the legal implication of the proposition of this commission is as far as wealth distribution within these tiers of government are concerned. Is it far-reaching? What is the reality? Does it have to go deep into the reconstruction or amendment of the Constitution?
Thank you, Shehu. I will first start by commending Mr. Riwan for his insight into what the problem is. And speaking from the perspective of a member of the National Economic Team of the nation, from his own perspective, is indeed worrisome. And the quest for amendment is something that a lot of people are now seeing to be selfish and partisan. When you look at the provision of the Constitution presently as it is, you will see that the legislative list of the federal government, the exclusive list of the federal government, has a number of things that ordinarily the federal government should not be saddled with. So when you're looking at a situation where you want to amend the sharing formula as provided for in the Constitution, you must also consider a number of other factors. I am one of those who have quarreled for some time now about the provision in section, I think, 162, that talks about how this revenue will be shared and the line charge in relation to funds meant for the local government being paid into the state government, right? And so that gives the state governors some power or leverage over the local government. Now, for as long as that provision remains and it is not expunged, you will continue to have this same issue of lack of development or infrastructural development across the state and also the local government. For the federal government is carrying too much. The burden of the federal government is heavy, and a lot of the things that the federal government is carrying should not ordinarily be there. Now, when you break it up the way it is in the provision of the Constitution, what you then now find is the bulk of the money that is being allocated to the government is used to sustain recurrent expenditure. As a government, we're not into production, and so you can see that the problem is there. Is it something that can be done now? I like what the president said, that the amendment will not be effected. He's not going to present the bill before the National Assembly until there is a constitutional amendment. But before you can then have that constitutional amendment, I like what to say. Is it possible for the state governors to want to give in to what the situation is now? If you ask for my opinion, the answer is no. So we're still very far from having a constitution that will be all-embracing and all-encompassing.
Mr. Norris Quaker, thank you so much for your thought, as well as Mr. Bismarck Iwaning on this issue of fiscal federalism and the new proposition by RMAFC on the sharing formula. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your thought tonight.